Let's begin.
Hey there, scary story fanatics. Welcome back to Cleaving Thought from Bone with your host, Sociopathic. Don't change that dial just yet. You've tuned into something truly interesting. So interesting, it'll knock you dead. So, if you're feeling trapped, escape through the POV of tonight's main character, someone who took one step too far to experience the past. It's time for a little tale that Doughboy420 likes to call UVB-76.
I was a headstrong kid, just out of high school. Many of my friends have been accepted to various colleges, but I had something different in mind. Something a little less conventional. A road trip across Europe and Asia. I wanted to explore the world. I wanted to get out of this small Pennsylvania town and see what the world had to offer. A couple of my friends wanted to join me, and I welcomed the company. I knew it would be intimidating to travel through new places, especially a few places where Americans were looked down upon. It was the beginning of summer when our trip began. I was packing things into my dad's station wagon when the first of our trio showed up. The blue SUV pulled into the driveway, and my buddy, Alex, hopped out of the passenger seat.
Hey, Eric.
He said cheerfully.
Ready to get the show on the road?
He continued. Ready as ever, I exclaimed, excited for the adventure to come.
Ready to visit Amsterdam?
He whispered.
If you know what I mean.
He asked, placing his fingers to his lips, pretending to inhale an imaginary joint. Dude, shh, I whispered back at him. My dad is right there, I told him, pointing a thumb over my shoulder toward my dad, who was packing my things into the station wagon. Alex and I had been friends since second grade. He'd always been a little bit of a troublemaker, but he was good people. He was the one that got me started in party culture. The two of us just finished packing our things into the station wagon, and my dad drove us across town to pick up the third guy of our trio, Shane. Shane moved here back in high school, and being the new kid in school, he didn't have any friends, but he seemed cool, so we invited him to a party, and we've all been hanging out ever since. The three stoner amigos.
Hey guys.
Shane said as he came out of his house.
Hey man, you ready for the time of your life?
Hell yeah, man. I've always wanted to visit the town my grandparents were from. They always used to tell me about it when I was little.
Alright. Don't go getting all sentimental on me now.
Shane's grandparents had moved to America from Russia back in the 50s. We always joked that they were Cold War spies, but they were good people. They always wanted to go back to their small town, but they never got the chance because they sadly passed away just over a year ago. So now, Shane was going to visit their little town. I guess he wanted to carry out their dream. It wasn't long before we were off again and to the airport. We got there with little time to spare and almost had to rush to our plane. We got there with just enough time to check in and check our luggage. I hugged my dad goodbye, which got a remark of,
Aw, how cute.
from Alex.
Come on, man. Let's get the show on the road.
Don't you mean Sky?
Yeah, what he said.
Alex continued, pointing to Shane. The three of us got on the plane and took off for our first stop, Rome, Italy. After a few dozen hours, several layovers, and just as many barf bags because apparently I don't take flying so well, we made it to Rome. We rented a car there and visited dozens of sites. In Rome, the Colosseum and the Vatican, we visited the Leaning Tower of Pisa and went through Venice. We traveled west through France, visiting the Eiffel Tower, the Louvre, and the Notre Dame Cathedral. We traveled through Belgium and on to the Netherlands, where we stayed at a hostel, completely unfazed after seeing the movie with the same title, and we went to some smoke shops and smoked some killer weed. I mean, killer. The best I've ever had, and I've smoked some hardcore bud. We may or may not have also visited the red light district, if you know what I'm saying. After our weekend-long party in Amsterdam, we decided to continue on across Germany, visiting several sites in Berlin. It was at that time that we decided that it was time for Shane to visit his ancestral home in Russia. So, we set off through Poland and Belarus and on into Russia. We decided we would visit the capital city of Moscow before heading north to where his grandparents used to live, just a few hours outside of the city. We saw several names that we couldn't pronounce even if we wanted to, and several letters that we didn't even recognize. Luckily, Shane knew enough Russian to get us to where we needed to go. Moscow was actually a really beautiful city. We took a cruise down on the river on a tour boat and saw all kinds of interesting places like Red Square, Catherine's Palace, and the Kremlin. That name always reminded me of a certain race of reptile baddies from an old Super Nintendo game. The three of us were amazed by the architecture and culture of the city. We even stopped off for some vodka testing. You know what they say, when in Russia. That night we stayed at a cheap hotel and decided to head out for a small town a few hours north. The town where Shane's grandparents were from. A town whose name I could not pronounce if my life depended on it. The night was pretty cold, and the hotel that we were staying in was not insulated so very well, so I was having trouble staying asleep. During the night, at around 3 or so in the morning, I awoke and could not get back to sleep. I laid there on the lumpy bed for nearly half an hour, my eyes drifting around in the darkness of my room. It was then that my eye caught an old radio that sat on an end table in the corner of the room. I got up and made my way over to it. The radio was covered in dust, and it looked like no one had touched it in years. I also found myself thinking that I wished I had not decided to be so tight on the price when choosing hotels. This one was obviously not very clean. I pulled up a chair from a nearby table and sat beside the window and began fiddling around with it. Surprisingly, the radio still worked. The sound quality was terrible, but the thing was from the Stone Ages. I was just amazed that it still functioned at all. I moved an old dial and some switches. It mostly picked up static, but every now and then I would find a few radio talk shows and some bad music, but it was all in Russian, so I couldn't understand a word of it. After messing around with it for a while, I came across a weird sound. The sound was a low, monotonous sound, like a buzzing or a hum. The tone would sound off every few seconds, at a constant pace, non-stop. Normally, a radio station like this would just be shrugged off as some sort of test station. But this one was different. I found myself mesmerized by it. It was hypnotizing. I sat there for a few minutes, just listening to the monotonous buzzing. Every few seconds, it would ring again within my ears. However, the trance it had on me was soon broke when I began to hear whispering behind the tone. A low, intelligible whisper. I could not hear what was being said, but I knew that voices were there. At least 2, maybe 3 different voices, all talking behind the tone. I leaned closer to the radio, trying desperately to hear the speech behind the hum. It was then that I heard a sound. An ear-piercing scream burst out through the radio's speakers. I jumped in fright and kicked the radio over, causing it to smash into several pieces on the floor. I sat there, and a cold feeling of dread flooded over me. What the hell was that? I asked myself. What did I just hear? I asked myself out loud again. As I began to catch my breath and calm down, I looked down onto the floor, and a moment of realization hit me. Shit, I said, as I looked down at the broken, antique radio laying upon the floor. Maybe no one will notice, I said, hopefully. Sleep eluded me for another hour or so that night. The thought of the radio station danced within my mind. I tried to rationalize it, to make sense of it, but I didn't know what I had heard. I had finally talked myself down from the fear by telling myself that it was probably just some kind of radio show or stunt like the War of the Worlds fiasco way back when. Finally, I was able to get back to sleep, albeit a restless one. The next day, we set off for the little town to the northwest. We all piled into the rental car and began the hour-long drive. We made it out of the city, and now it was nothing but the countryside, all snow and forests. Soon, we were beyond the reach of the Moscow radio stations, and the radio changed from popular American music to nothing but static. I reached down and flipped through the stations, but it was all static, just like the radio from the night before. I flipped the radio off, and then we heard nothing but the car and the sound of the wind blowing through the trees and valleys. The skies were dark and cloudy. The beauty and charm of Moscow was surrounded by a dark and abysmal wilderness of Russia. But the darkened skies were more than just overcast of a snow-covered country. It was a storm rolling in, and I could tell it was going to be a bad one. Within minutes, a downpour started. Freezing rain and snow began falling from the sky, making it impossible for me to see the road ahead.
Damn, man. It's raining cats and dogs out here.
Shane said from the passenger seat next to me.
I can't even see the road,
said Alex from the back.
How the hell do you drive in this?
He then asked me. With great precision, I said, half jokingly and half serious. It was then that a loud static filled the car, causing us all to jump. The radio had somehow turned itself back on. None of us had touched it. I reached down to flick the loud static off of the radio, and then I heard it. The loud, monotone, buzzing sound of the radio station sounded through the speakers of the car. Then, another loud buzz followed just seconds later. It was the same station I had heard on the radio in the hotel room the night before. I stared down at the radio in shock and fear. This tone somehow filled me with a deep sense of dread.
Hey, look out!
Alex screamed from the back seat. I looked up in time to see a tree falling into the road ahead of us. I slammed on the brakes and the car fishtailed back and forth. I struggled to maintain control of the car, but it was too late. The car spun out of control, off the road, and right down a muddy hill and into a large snowbank at the bottom. "Holy shit," I said, breathing heavily. "Is everyone all right?" I then asked in a panic, turning to check on my friends.
Yeah, I think I'm alright.
Shane answered.
You can't drive for shit, man,
said Alex as he climbed up off the floor in the back. "Sorry about that. At least we're all right," I said.
Yeah, but we are about 40 miles from a town.
Shit.
Well, let's get up to the road and see if we can flag down a car.
We all climbed out of the car and looked around. We really were in the middle of nowhere. In just about every direction, there was nothing but trees and mountains. I had really gotten us into some shit.
Hey, maybe we can find someone over there,
Shane exclaimed, pointing off into the woods. Down the hill from us, we could see a small, gray-colored building peeking out from behind the trees in the forest.
I sure as hell hope so,
Alex added, as he began to walk toward the building. The rest of us followed in his footsteps through the snow, walking along the path that he had made ahead of us. As we got closer, we saw more and more of the building. It was a bit bigger than we had originally thought, and behind it was a small field. Within the field stood an old metal radio tower that stretched into the sky above the building. Alex and Shane continued on toward the building, but I stopped for a moment and stared at the place. First, the radio in the hotel, then the radio in the car, and now a radio station. I was afraid to go further. This couldn't have been a coincidence.
Hey!
Shane yelled back at me, breaking me out of the trance of fear that I had been stuck in. "What?" I said, looking back at him.
I asked you if you were coming. Or were you just gonna stand there in the snow all day?
Shane answered. Yeah, I said, as I began to walk again, dreading every step I made closer to that building. I knew something was wrong. We made it up to the door of the radio station, and Alex reached for the handle. "Wait!" I said to him.
What?
He said as he looked back at me, completely confused. "What if they don't want company?" I asked, trying to find an excuse, any excuse, to not enter the building.
I'm sure they wouldn't have a problem if we explained the situation.
"Well, what if they don't understand us, and they think that we're trying to rob them?" I said, still fishing for excuses.
Okay,
Alex replied, confused by my sudden unwillingness to enter the radio station.
Does walking back to Moscow sound like a better alternative?
I guess you have a point. I answered him, completely admitting my defeat. Alex grasped the cold handle of the door and pushed it open with a loud creaking noise. Inside, the room was dark and it appeared abandoned.
Great,
said Alex in a sarcastic tone.
Maybe there's a phone. Or maybe we can use the radio to call for help?
Shane suggested optimistically. The two of them stepped inside, and I hesitated for a moment before following them. The station somehow seemed colder on the inside than it was on the outside. I watched my breath turn into a thick mist as it left my mouth. I walked around the empty building, looking for some way to contact the outside world. the place was completely barren. All that we could see were a few turned-over tables and the gray brick walls. There were also papers scattered about the floor, covered in illegible words in Russian. The three of us found a hallway and traveled down it. We passed a few empty rooms with no signs of habitation at all.
This place has been empty for a long time. We probably aren't going to find shit in here,
Alex said, before stopping suddenly. He then lifted his foot up and looked at the bottom of his boot.
I stand corrected,
he said, before he grabbed some old papers off the floor and wiped the mess off of his foot.
Literally.
Shane said, sending us bursting into laughter. We had laughed at the moment at hand for a while before I noticed something further down the hallway. I could see a faint red glow coming from the room at the end of the corridor. "There's a light," I said in amazement, pointing my finger down the hall toward the glow. Alex tossed the crap-covered papers onto the floor and rushed down the hallway toward the room. Shane and I quickly followed. We watched Alex round the corner of the door, and we were just steps behind him. But when we entered the room, it was empty. Alex was not there, but that was impossible. We had just seen him enter the same room just mere seconds before us.
Alex?
Shane called to him as we looked around the empty room. "What the hell?" I said.
Where the hell did he go? Alex!
Shane called out again. No one answered. He was gone. I don't know how, but he was gone. It was then that a sound froze us both where we stood. It was the same sound as on the radio. The same low, monotone buzz. I scanned my eyes across the room and found a speaker sitting next to a microphone at a table in the corner. Above and around the table was a lot of radio equipment, and there was a sign above the desk. A glowing red sign that read, "On the air." Shane rushed over to the microphone on the desk and picked it up. In a panic, he began to call out for help, begging for anyone to listen.
Hello? Hello? Can anybody hear us? Please, help! Mayday! Mayday! SOS!
He pleaded, yelling out anything he possibly could to get someone's attention to come help us. His attempts to call for help were soon interrupted by the sound of a loud, blood-curdling scream. The scream was the same as the one I had heard on the radio the previous night. It had emanated from down the hallway, back toward the way we had came. Shane and I looked at each other in shock. Then he sat the microphone down and began to creep slowly toward the door. "What the hell are you doing?" I whispered to him. He was obviously crazy for wanting to investigate the source of the scream. But then again, that was our only way out of this building, so we had no other choice. Slowly, the two of us crept out of that room and down the hallway, moving stealthily through the darkness. The sound of the buzzing now echoed through the hall from behind us. It was like the beating heart of the building that we were trapped inside. We snuck down the hallway, passing each of the empty rooms, back toward the large entrance room of the building. But when we rounded the corner of the hallway, we were hit with both shock and a rancid smell. The room was filled with dead bodies, all in various stages of decomposition, some sitting propped up against the wall, and others laying, curled up, or sprawled out across the floor. And the smell that hit us was that of death and decay, the smell of rotting corpses. I almost immediately curled over and vomited onto the floor, while Shane just stood there in silent shock. Then we heard the ear-piercing scream again. It not only echoed off the walls, but also sounded to be originating from within them. Quickly, the two of us made a mad dash for the door. We ran past the corpses and swung the door open before bolting through it. We quickly froze in terror, though, because what we saw was not the snow and trees of the Russian countryside, but the cold, gray walls of the hallway. We turned and looked behind us from the door that we had just passed through, but instead of seeing the entrance room filled with corpses, we saw the radio room with the "on the air" sign glowing red within it, and the speaker emitting the same haunting, buzzing sound. Somehow, we were back where we had started.
What the fuck?
Shane said in confusion. I just stood there, trying to make some sort of sense of all this. I looked down the hallway, back towards the large room, and then, without a single word, I began to walk down it again, fearing what I would find at the end.
Where are you going?
Shane asked, but I didn't answer. Soon, Shane caught up with me, and together we walked toward the entrance room. We rounded the corner and into the room, and again, we were shocked. The room was empty. The corpses that were once there were now nowhere to be found. What the hell is going on? I asked, before making my way back toward the entrance door, hoping that I would not see the same gray brick wall on the other side. I reached down and grasped the handle of the door. Here goes nothing, I said, as I swung the door open. On the other side, I saw the snow. The door led outside. Quickly, I stepped through the doorway, but I was quickly disappointed. I clearly saw the snow outside, but as soon as I had stepped through the threshold of the door, I was met with a familiar sight of the gray wall of the hallway. Shit, I said in defeat. I don't know what to do, Shane. I think we're stuck in here, I continued. But I got no response. Just silence. Shane? I asked as I turned around. Shane! I yelled out in fear as I began to realize that Shane had not followed me through the door. I was alone. The scream came again, bellowing from within the walls. Then I saw them. The sources of the screaming. I watched as dark, mist-like hands began to slowly emerge from the walls, followed by arms and then legs. Around a dozen or so shadow-like apparitions stepped forth from within the walls. The figures had no facial features, only darkness. A darkness blacker than black. In a panic, I ran down the hallway, past the outstretched arms as the figures emerged from the walls behind me. I ran toward the door, knowing it would only bring me back to the room with the red, glowing sign, but it was my only option, my only possible escape from this terror. I swung the door open and stepped through. Sure enough, I was back in the abandoned hallway. Luckily, the dark things were no longer there, but I still dreaded what terrible thing awaited me down the hall. I didn't have to wait long to find out. Again, I heard the bellowing screams, and then I saw it. I watched as a slime-dripping tentacle wrapped around the corner and onto the wall of the hallway. It was followed by another that slapped down onto the floor with a wet, slopping sound. From around the corner came a clawed hand that clawed into the brick wall just below the tentacle. Then an ovular, almost cone-shaped head peeked out from around the corner, and sunken within that head were two large, glowing red eyes. I spun around in fear and ducked back into the room with the microphone before barricading myself in with anything that wasn't bolted down. Now, I'm sitting in the darkness of this room. Only the red light of that sign to light the room, and I can hear the thing outside the door. It's clawing and scratching. It's only a matter of time before it gets in. It's only a matter of time before it gets me. Just like I'm sure it got Alex and Shane. I know now that there is no escape for me. Help will never arrive. And to be honest, I hope it doesn't. If by some chance you hear this broadcast, please don't come here. Stay away from the radio station in the woods.
So, it seems that if you're in need of help, those that may answer could lead you someplace worse, whether you were searching for assistance or not. Maybe I'll just stick to FM from now on. But if you want more screams of fear and fun, make sure to stop in again next weekend. And until then, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications so I can catch you all again next Saturday.
Social media can be very unpredictable, especially regarding horror content. If this content gets removed, all new content will be simultaneously presented on various websites provided in the description to this video. Make sure to follow me in other digital spaces so that you never miss out on the terror. Also, if you like this video, make sure to leave a comment and hit the like button. It helps the channel a lot. If you're new to the channel and you enjoy what's here, consider hitting that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you never miss an upload. Writing is a dream of mine, and it's all of you that make that dream come true.